Welcome to a special edition of Fatima TV Worldwide. I'm John Vennari. We're here in Rome at the Fatima Your Last Chance conference, and we've been interviewing the various speakers who have been making presentations all week. And today, we have with us in the studio Dr. Brian McCall, Professor of Law at Oklahoma University. Please welcome Dr. McCall. Well, Professor of Law, that's a pretty good title.
It's better than lawyer.
It is better than lawyer. And well, I think what we'll start with is what you're doing now, what you've done in the past, and the type of topics we're going to cover in these presentations here.
Sure. Well, I've been teaching at the University of Oklahoma College of Law since 2006, and I teach first-year students contracts, and then I teach a variety of upper-level courses. And then I research and publish in the area of applying natural law principles to business, commercial, and corporate aspects of law. So I write some articles that are more generally considering the nature of natural law, and then others addressing particular topics, such as corporate governance, finance, usury. Before that, my background, after graduating from law school, I worked for an international law firm in the United States and then 7 years in Europe, based in London, but practiced really all across the continent, advising on cross-border financial transactions, securities offerings, structured finance, and mergers and acquisitions. So representing a lot of different clients, such as Citibank, JP Morgan, Barclays Bank, large US international corporations making acquisitions in Europe. So I did that for about 10 years total, 7 in Europe, and then made the transition into academia, where I've been, as I said, since 2006.
So then in your work as academe, you have this whole experience to pull from. It's
Yes.
sometimes said that people in academia, they don't live in the real world. It's all theory and no practice. But you've been through the ringer, as it were.
Yes.
With corporate finance and things like that.
Yes.
What we could start talking about is I'll throw out a quote from Father Dennis Fahey, his definition of liberalism.
Okay.
He defined liberalism very simply and in one sentence. He said, liberalism is the belief that there is any aspect of God's creation that is not subject to his law. That's pretty vast. Now, the reason I bring that up is because in the modern world, we tend to be fragmented, and everything is in its own little compartments, not really touching one another. And one of the big things we see is this supposed vast chasm between the world of economics and what we'll say natural law or even divine law. The economics is in its own world, and religion or even natural law is in its own world. What do you have to say about that as far as the reality of such an outlook?
Well, you're right. I think it's prevalent, and we see the results of that chasm all around our world right now. Most people, they think that way. I go to church, and I believe in God, and I live a moral life, but then I go to work, and that has nothing to do with these other things. That economics is just, it's not nothing to do with morality or ethics or natural law. It's just forces that are happening, and it's neither good nor bad. And this is really, like all liberalism, a modern development. For thousands of years, going all the way back to the Greek philosophers, economics was always understood as a sub-discipline, as underneath the discipline of ethics or morality. And Aristotle, in his commentary on ethics, has an entire section on economics, or more accurately, he called household management, the management of material goods.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to, because most people think of economics of just simply the transmission of money, or investment,
Yes.
or the distribution of wealth, or whatever. But economics is much more than that.
Yes, it's much more than that. I mean, at its root, it's satisfying human needs and finding the best ways to meet the needs that we have to continue living and to live as good a life as possible. And it really is broader than just money. I mean, that's a part of economics. And Aristotle calls that political economy, sort of the larger organization of the households, of the smaller communities, so that they can, again, more effectively work with one another. But it's interesting, the argument about economics are separate. Well, what's the definition of morality? Let's go back to the very basics. Morality or ethics are rules for human action, just basic definition. So if you ever say, what's the rule for deciding how you should act or what you should do, you find those rules in the discipline of ethics, which is applying and understanding the natural law created by God, and then abstracting from that the particulars of what you should do. Well, what is economics? Economics is obviously human actions. There are particular types of human actions: buying, selling, building, manufacturing, transporting goods, providing services. I mean, we don't speak about the economics of dogs or the economics of butterflies, right? They don't have economic activity. It's a purely human activity because you need to have a rational capacity to perform economics. It's not about just wandering through the forest like an animal does and seeing something and eating it. We apply our mind to cultivating the land, to producing new and improving and producing new goods and techniques. So by its very definition, economics involves human action. Therefore, it's subject to ethics, since the definition is the rules to govern human actions.
So then, now economics, there's a lot of people talking about economics now because we seem to be right on the brink of some sort of catastrophe.
Well, I think we're off the brink.
But what we had talked about earlier is this, how did we get there, and the relationship with where we are now to basic natural law theory.
Yes. Well, again, I think it is, you were right, I think, in starting off with the quote about liberalism, because this is really part of a larger problem, which is the rejection of the natural law and of the order that God set to the universe. Because God organized the universe, and He expects us and asks us to live our lives a particular way, but He gives us the gift, the great gift, to participate in that ordering, to think about what we're doing, what our actions are, and to choose the good. The first principle of the natural law is that good should be done. And so God invites us to participate in that. But for centuries, we have rebelled against God and said, no, thank you, God. I know for thousands of years we've been working that out, but we think we're going to try it on our own. We don't think either different varieties of it. Either you don't exist and your law doesn't exist, or if it does, it's not really relevant, and we can do better on our own. We can figure out better rules.
It's part of the modern, going back to the French Revolution even, this idea of the deification of man. Yes. That man is the highest, and there's no God in his heavens saying thou shalt or thou shalt not.
Exactly. And if in the natural law area, I think we can trace a lot of this rebellion back to a Protestant academic who held the chair in natural law, and his name was Grotius. And he wrote books particularly on international law. He has a big reputation for developing international law. But in the very beginning of one of his books, he makes a very significant comment. And he says, and remember, he's a Protestant, he believes in God. But he says, even if God didn't exist, the natural law would still bind. And I think that's the beginning of this complete degeneration of law, because he posits this hypothesis, which is insane. It's nonsensical.
Yes,
well, if God didn't exist, there would be order anyway. Well, where would it come from?
It's almost like saying if man didn't exist, there would still be man.
Exactly. That's what it's like saying. But from this, and again, it shows you where ideas, to refer to Richard Weaver's book from the 40s, ideas have consequences. And I'm sure Grotius was probably well-intentioned. He didn't intend to destroy Western law, but by this offhand comment and this idea, it starts a cycle. And then, well, if God doesn't exist, I've been told there's this natural law, why should I obey it if I can cheat and get away with it, right? So, okay, I understand this is good because I want people to be good to me and I'll be good to them, but what if I can get away with it and nobody finds out about it? If there's no God in heaven watching what I'm doing, human fallen
Yes.
human nature is going to try to cheat and take it. And so you start now seeing this loss of confidence that it really exists. And then whenever God is dethroned and taken away, man assumes the place. Well, if God doesn't create natural law, I can just make whatever law I want, and I'm not constrained. This is sort of great news if I'm a ruler, because now I have no constraints. If there's no God above judging me, I can make whatever rules I want. And it really feeds the Protestant idea of divine right or absolutism of rule, which really is a Protestant, not a Catholic idea.
Yes.
Because once you remove the natural and the divine law, you've got a dictator. There's nothing constraining you.
Well, it's interesting. Dr. Burnett, he often says, he talks about this idea of a good atheist. And he says, in a certain sense, there's really no such thing, because ultimately the atheist has he doesn't answer to anyone. And he can really he can do anything without fear of punishment. And he said, if you're an atheist, I don't want you babysitting my children. Because at the beginning of the night, you might have one set of rules.
Right.
Well, by the end of the night, you could have something different.
Now, again, I think I agree with that. What we have to be a little careful, though, is that the natural law is inscribed on our hearts.
Yes.
And so there were pre-Christians and there are atheists who can stumble upon and find principles of the natural law and do certain things which are in of themselves good. And that where that misleads people is they get these ideas, oh, you can be a good atheist, you can be, but the problem is you're doing it surreptitiously, or you're doing it by chance. You happen to come upon these principles, but as you point out, you can easily lose them and be pulled away and distracted.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean the person's conscience won't bother them if they do change their rules.
No.
There's a wonderful scene in, not a scene, but something that happened with Father DeSmit when he was evangelizing, should we say Indians or Native Americans? What are we allowed to say? I don't know. But I'll still say Indians. He was evangelizing the Indians, the Blackfeet, and now these people were pagans. They were pagans. They were literally savages. And but you see the working of the natural law, because they pleaded with the Black Road, they pleaded with Father DeSmit to come and teach us. And then they said to him, we are wicked. We have bad hearts.
Yes.
And so they knew.
Yes.
They knew that they were going against the law that is inscribed in their own heart.
Yes.
So, so once we divorce economics from God, then what do we end up with? As if we need you to tell us, but let's have a little scientific breakdown of it.
Well, we end up with a mess. Because again, these are rules for human action, and whenever we violate the rules, there are consequences, even on the natural level. So we know on the supernatural level, God will hold us to account, but God is perfectly just, and He will provide both natural and supernatural consequences. And so violating principles of right action has consequences. And so what happens is once you divorce it is economics starts to drift off like many other disciplines in the universities. Because the universities, for centuries, you had theology at the top, philosophy, and then the other disciplines that supported those. So what do the other disciplines do? They researched and found information to give that information and to integrate that information into philosophy and theology. So natural sciences, you study observations in nature to understand them, to aid our philosophical and ultimately theological understanding. But now what happens when that system is broken is economics drifts off. They say, well, all we're doing is studying what happens, which, again, there's nothing wrong with that. Observation is how we go about learning. But they say it ends there. So all we do is we watch what happens. When this particular type of economic activity happens, here's a result. And they then say, but they have now no criteria for evaluating that result. And so, because they've divorced from philosophy and from theology. And so then the only thing they can have left is, within their own system, well, what produced the most wealth? And that becomes the sole criteria for right or wrong, which is pure utilitarianism.
Well, one thing you said that struck me is the economics within the science of ethics. Because anyone who has studied a good Thomistic, scholastic course will know that economics is the very last thing at the end of the book.
Yes.
It's the last thing you study, because you start with general principles, and then the particulars, and then the conjugal society, which is marriage, and the domestic society, which is the family, and then you move into to political theory, and then at the end of all that, you come to economics. So the proper ordering of that is someone in economics should have all this
Yes.
knowledge, should have all these distinctions of right and wrong within the large context
Right.
of all of creation. But this is not what we have today. We have economics just as you're saying,
Off
it's
on
just
its own.
off on its own. Yes.
And again, they miss the whole point of it. A lot of people misinterpret this, and they say, "Oh, philosophy. These are these poor people wandering around thinking we shouldn't have any money. We should be poor and just think great thoughts." Well, that's false. If we look at Aristotle, we look at St. Thomas, having a reasonable amount of economic security is actually very important to living the philosophical good life. Because the philosophical good life in the Greco-Roman Catholic tradition is full natural fulfillment, which involves fulfilling all the aspects of man's nature. The basic aspect of man's nature is preservation of life. Man is alive, he's a living substance, and to preserve life, you need necessity. I mean, you need food, you need shelter, and so philosophy recognizes you need a certain amount of wealth, but it's oriented towards an end. It's not to have for its own sake, just for the sake of having it. It's to fulfill human needs so that you may have a full, complete life. Another aspect of human nature is man's life in society. We are, as Aristotle says, social animals. We are meant to live and share life with people. And again, part of that is having enough resources for people. If you're starving and worrying about where your next bite of food's going to come from, you don't have the ability to share a meal in common, to talk and share ideas. So putting it at the end of the book is not at all saying it's not important or it's better if you're poor. It's putting it in its proper place as a means, as a secondary end, a means to a higher end. And as long as you keep those together, teaching St. Thomas is clear on this. It's not that you should have not a lot of wealth or control. You can have a lot, you can have a medium amount, and that's not really what's important. What's important is that you have it oriented in its proper place.
I know this isn't something we plan to talk about, but since you bring it up,
yes,
you bring up wealth. I notice that people get very moral about wealth. Those who have it shouldn't. The rich and this great gulf between the rich and the poor, and this huge injustice.
There's a lot of confusion on that topic.
Yes. I don't know if you want to.
Right. I mean, and unfortunately, I think some of this has been from the confused teaching of the church since the Second Vatican Council on this issue.
Yes.
And the church's traditional teaching is very clear.
We'll say one thing before you start is neither one of us are wealthy, so we're not defending ourselves. We're in the other category.
But there were very clear principles of Catholic economic thought for centuries. But in the last few decades, they've sort of been taken over by this revolutionary idea that wealth is bad and reformulated the Catholic principles. And the one great example of this is the favorite line, the preferential option for the poor, which is sort of, well, go and grab some wealth for you. And these are not Catholic principles at all. The true Catholic understanding, again, is that man has been given all the abundant resources. God in the garden says, here's everything. It's for man. All of creation on the earth is made for you. And your job is to organize it and rule over it. And it meant to serve us, and God provides it and arranges it. And we learn very quickly, though, that because we live in a society, we need to have an organized way of dealing with it. And notwithstanding the myths that go all the way back to Plato, that we can all just share everything equally, it doesn't work. And it leads to obvious problems that are the same today as they were in Plato's time. Nobody knows what to do. There's disorganization. There's jealousy. There's free riding, because if everybody owns everything, why should I go cultivate the field if I'm going to get the product? And so we realize as what St. Thomas calls a secondary principle of the natural law, which is something that isn't the most general principle, but as we have experience and look around, we can derive this secondary principle, which is that resources should be individually divided up among people, because it's better for us. It's a better way of organizing and meeting our ultimate goal. And so the idea is that there is enough for everyone, but that isn't an equal sharing of everything. And God allows distributions and different, just as with other natural gifts. Some people, my wife is an excellent musician, and most of my children can read music, and I'm terrible. I can't, don't get me start singing on the show. We'll have viewers fleeing. But is that unfair that she can do that? Or my children can and I can't? No, God distributes his talents and gifts to who he does. And some of that is some people have others. And it's not to be a source then that's not a source of injustice. So let's go back, what's justice? Giving to someone their due. Now, someone that has wealth may have committed an injustice if, and this is the critical point, the way he obtained it was unjust. And so there's a type of justice Aristotle calls commutative justice. And we have the resources out there, but if in the way I deal with you with respect to the good breaks a law of justice, then I shouldn't have that wealth because I've obtained it in an unjust way. But that's very different from just saying because you have it, it's unjust. That's making a leap. Then secondly, the other area of injustice is once I have wealth, just like any gift God gives, I have obligations with respect to the way I use it. Now, God grants me great discretion in how I use it, but there are limits, and I have obligations for, just as, I say this to our children all the time. Our one son has an incredible gift for Irish dancing. I mean, we have 6 children who've learned it, but he just is amazing. He has a brilliant gift. I said, you have to continue doing this, because to be given a gift and just squander it and not use it is ungratitude to God. And so once those who have wealth have certain obligations to use it for the good, for the common good of the society. Several examples. St. Thomas, there were some wealthy people who went to him and said, should I just give all my money away and be poor? He said, no. God gave that to you for a reason. You should use that wealth for good purposes and for supporting religious institutions. And so this modern idea that just because there's differences of wealth, that is de facto unjust, it really has no argument or basis or understanding of justice behind it.
Well, what about when we take it to the next step, which is it is the duty of the federal government to take the money from the wealthy and to set up this whole system of a whole giveaway system. What does the Catholic faith of all time say about that? Because that is prevalent right now in the United States and Western Europe. Yeah.
Well, several misunderstandings with that. One is, traditionally, there's a second type of justice from the one we talked about, commutative, which is when individuals deal with each other. They have certain rules they have to follow that are to make what they're doing just. There's also distributive justice, and this is one that has been very much misinterpreted to support falsely the argument you mentioned. And what distributive justice is, there are certain common goods that a society owns in common. And those are to be distributed in a just manner. And what's first point is we're only talking about goods that are held in common. So a good example is honors and reputation in the community is actually a good of the whole community. And that should be accorded according to a principle of distribution. Now, the principle of distribution you select, there's discretion, but what violates distributive justice is when you break that principle. So if we have a principle of, say, distribution of respect or honors, those should be distributed to the people who contribute most to the society. So someone who has worked for the good of the society should be honored. But if we then start giving honors out to criminals and I would say politicians, but well, maybe I shouldn't say that, to people that are not doing well for the society, we violated our principle of distribution and done it the wrong way. But that term, distributive justice, often gets pulled out and just said, oh, that means all wealth. Well, no, it doesn't say private wealth should be taken away and given. It's just talking about the distribution of common resources. So again, we have common libraries, public libraries, common
parks, police force.
And again, those should be accessible and distributed according to a proper principle. So maybe a public library in a town is available to people that live there, and that's distributed to the people near there, so people 700 miles away don't get distributed those resources, because the principle of distribution is geography, who's close to that particular resource. But it gets taken out, and it's used as a justification for theft, for violating the seventh commandment, and saying basically without cause, I'm going to take something that belongs to you, some wealth, the government speaking here, in violation of the seventh commandment, and take it away from you. Again, that's different from if you have something that doesn't belong to you. So you obtain something unjustly or illegally, then the government's job, with respect to another type of justice, retributive justice, which is to correct errors that have been made, can take it away. But absent that, the government is committing a violation of law, a violation of natural law, to just say, we've decided we'd like to take your things and give them to someone else. It's no different in principle than I driving by your house and seeing your car and saying, that's a really nice car, John, but actually I think this guy over here should have it, so I'm just going to take it and give it to him. I mean, just because the government does it doesn't make it any more wrong.
Well, I remember years ago, I mean, I was young, and the first one of my first definitions of socialism I found under the seventh commandment.
Yes,
you know, thou shalt not steal.
Yes,
and they were explaining that this is the basic problem with it. It's just the sheer taking of it. But that today is considered justice. That today is considered justice.
Well, again, this false new category of justice that get coined in the last half, social justice. It's not a traditional term. Again, there's commutative justice, distributive justice, retributive justice, and legal justice, which is our obligations towards the society, individuals' obligation to work to the common good. There is no term social justice. It was just made up.
It can't be defined.
It can't be defined. Now, to be fair, there was a thinker in the 19th century, Taparelli, who used the term you refer to what we generally call subsidiarity,
yes,
which is a true principle. But that term was taken out and given a life of its own to then justify public theft.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're running out of time. There's a couple of things that we want to talk about. One of the things I think we could deal with is the whole, within the context of economics, the whole understanding of usury. Yes. Because I remember I gave a talk here about against contraception, and when I was reading the materials, we talked about this before,
yes,
they claimed that, well, the church could change its teaching,
yes,
on contraception because it changed its teaching,
yes,
on usury.
And actually, I spent several years when I first got to the academy researching the history of Western teaching on usury for exactly this idea. And how much time do we have?
About 45 seconds.
Oh. Well, okay, the church didn't change its teaching, and we'll have to find another time to explain that.
Well, that's exactly what we'll do. We're going to take a short break. There's so much to talk about regarding economics, mainly because it's so misunderstood,
yes,
and we even have modern churchmen talking so-called Catholic economics, and it's coming from the Marxist playbook.
Yes.
You know, so that too is part of the whole, what we'll call diabolic disorientation.
Oh, yes.
Especially in the United States, where years ago we could look to the Catholic bishops to really teach us the proper principles, and now we're just getting, you know, what seems to be just from the playbook of the most left-wing platform of the Democratic Party. So there's a lot to talk about with Brian McCall, and we'll be back. We're back here with Dr. Brian McCall, professor of law of the University of Oklahoma, and we've been talking on the large subject of economics, not the way the Wall Street Journal would talk about it, and not the way the Dow Jones people would talk about it, but within the context of ethics, proper behavior of man, and Catholic teaching, Catholic social teaching. We're going to tackle a very large subject, and there's almost a veil of silence over this topic that most people don't even know what it is, even if they've heard the word before, and that is usury. So assuming that we know nothing, what is usury?
Sure. Well, I'd like to follow up with the introduction you gave last time a little bit, and the way you came to the subject's the same way I did. When I first got into the academy, I was starting to do some research, and I had a box of books that had been given to me by Michael Davies' wife when he passed away. And within it was a copy of the Dublin Review, and it was from the mid-'60s, and I was reading through it. There was an article by Judge Noonan in there arguing that the church was about to legalize, make moral, which is impossible, contraception. And his whole argument was that the church used to forbid usury, and now it's okay, and this is an example of where the church changed their teaching. I thought, and at the same time, I was at a debate on campus over a pro-life issue. I was just watching the debate. But the person in favor of abortion argued to the pro-life speaker that he was unjust because he was denying abortions to women now when in the future the church would change the law and they're now being denied something they could have had.
They're going to get anyway.
Yes, so both these hit me and I said, okay, I need to look at this topic. So I got Judge Noonan's book, which was his doctoral dissertation from Harvard, and then just studied the tradition from all the way back forward. And I published several articles on the topic. And the end of this summer, in August or September, I'll have a book being published by Ave Maria University entitled The Church and the Usurers, Unprofitable Lending for the Modern Economy, which will pull together about 2 or 3 years of research I did on the topic. So with that little bit of introduction, what is usury? Well, interestingly, it's one of the oldest moral principles, if we go back. It goes all the way back into the ancient world. And the ancient civilizations dealt with this topic and struggled with it. God, through the Bible, clearly expressed for our benefit the truth on the matter. And if you go through the Old Testament, usury is named as a sin and condemned throughout the entire Old Testament. And interestingly, always in the context of what we would, I think, all agree are very grave sins: murder, adultery, that certain abomination, which is referred to also extensively throughout the Old Testament. And so the divine law clearly reinforced from earliest times, this is a big one, this is a serious issue. And the church's principle has always remained, and to this day remains the same, has never been changed. And the principle is, it is unjust, and therefore against the natural law, against morality, to charge a profit when merely lending money to someone for their use as money. And like all natural law principles, that's a very general principle, stated in general. And the work, and much of the work of Catholic lawyers and theologians through the centuries, is to work out the specifics of that principle. So again, we can understand this. If I say to you, there's a natural law principle that murder of the innocent is immoral. You say, okay, I understand that. Well, what's murder? If I'm holding a gun and it goes off and I kill somebody who's innocent, have I committed murder? We'd say, well, no, because that doesn't meet the definition of murder. So you have to then work out in particular what the terms in the general proposition are. So usury is the charging of a profit on the mere loan of money. So what is profit? What is a loan? What is money? And that's what the church did for centuries. And just like the problems we face in issues like with contraception and abortion, new factual scenarios arise. And the church has to then, and scholars, lawyers, and philosophers have to stop and say, oh, here's something new. We need to understand this and see how it fits into the principle. So, when certain medical discoveries are made about enabling people to conceive a child through certain techniques, the church doesn't immediately say it's wrong. It says, well, what exactly are you doing? I have to understand what you're doing, and then I can judge the principles and see whether this is illicit, a moral or immoral way. So the same thing happened. For centuries, there was not a lot of economic changes, but particularly in the modern world, the nature of what is used as money and how it functions and the financial structures are very different from what they were 500 years ago. And so what the church has done, I found through the research, is to say, okay, in these new circumstances, this particular activity isn't actually a loan. It isn't usury, and that's okay. And therefore, it's licit. Just like, I might say, that using certain medicines that might help a woman to have a more hospitable environment in her body to conceive a child, it's helping with nature. Say, well, that's not an immoral use of medical technology, but in vitro fertilization is. They make those distinctions. They didn't change their teaching, they just applied the teaching to new circumstances. And in the 20th century, we face in 19th and 20th century, radically new circumstance, that our money is completely different from what it used to be. And the radical change in the nature of money. It is no longer anchored to anything real. It's completely manipulable. And that will then affect the applying our principle of usury. And that's very much what has changed in the sense of new applications of the principle have arisen. But from this, people like Judge Noonan and others have made a false argument, oh, well, the church changed their teaching. Not at all. And that's the most important reason I wrote the book, is to make that case clear, that it's never been a change of principle. You will notice, although the church has many issues in the post-conciliar period, has gone silent and hasn't proclaimed as vigorously against these errors as she should, same thing with contraception, there are still references to it. The Holy Father in his encyclical letter, Caritas in Veritate, refers to usury several times, doesn't discuss it or get into any of the details, but reminds everyone it's still a grave moral error. And so there are still, as with contraception, references here and there. But yes, sadly, and it's a common problem, the church has not as vigorously explained the teaching as she has. So if we want to try to understand a little bit more what those principles are, we can, if you want, we can go into that.
What I was going to say, is to get down to some concrete
things,
yes.
Sure. So we said charging profit on a loan. The idea is that if I lend you something and you return it to me, I shouldn't charge you any more. I shouldn't receive a greater gain, a profit on that. And start with real simple, because our world's more complex. But if we start with the simple examples, we can get to the complex. So let's say I have a bottle of wine in my wine cellar. And John, you call me up and say, I'm having a dinner party tonight. I'm out of wine. Could you lend me that bottle of Cabernet? I say, sure. I'm not having a dinner party tonight. I don't need it. So I bring it over to you. I say, but you have to return it to me. Now, obviously, I don't mean you have to return that same bottle of Cabernet. Right. That would be a little difficult. I mean, you don't just want to sit and look at it, you want to drink it. So wine is the type of asset, the type of property that is only good in its consumption, in its use. So you use it, but then in justice, you have to return the same kind of wine. So if I give you, a particular Cabernet wine that's, say, worth about $20.
I don't give you a bottle of Ripple.
You don't give me a box wine, for you return not the exact same one, but one of the equal quality. Yeah. And so now I am back in the same position I was before. I have my same bottle of wine. I haven't suffered any particular loss. Nothing's changed. Now, I've sold you, in a sense, another way to think about it, a bottle of wine for a bottle of wine. I sold you one bottle, and you paid another. So we had an equal exchange. But now I say, John, I also want to charge you for the right to drink that wine. I'm charging you twice for the same thing. I'm charging you the bottle of wine, plus I'm charging you for the right to drink it. Now, certain assets are different. They're not like the wine. They're things that you can use, but don't actually have to consume. Right? So maybe I have a house. Yes. Now, you can live in a house without destroying it, without using it up. There, it's possible for me to say, John, I'm not going to give you my house like the wine, because in order for you to drink the wine, it has to be yours, right? Because if it's not yours, you can't drink it. And if you think about it, just to jump to money, when I loan you money, we don't say you have my money anymore. I mean, the law says it's your money. If I give you a loan of $100, that's your money, because we understood, and this goes all the way back to Roman law, in order to use something that's consumed in use, it has to be yours. It can't just be you have borrowed it from someone. But a house is different. I can still own the house and let you use it. And there it could be reasonable for me to say, well, I'm going to charge you just for the use of the house, which to be just would have to be an amount less than the whole value of the house, because I'm just giving you a limited use of it. And so, again, back to the ancient world, people saw these distinctions, that for certain kinds of assets, the only way to own them to use them is to own them, and to charge a profit or amount for use as well as ownership is really charging for the same thing twice. And that is unjust. There are other arguments about why it's unjust on the natural law, but that we'll just, for our time purposes, stick with that one. Now, what's important about that is the church always, going back, distinguished, that's different from charging you or asking you to compensate me for a loss I suffer. So let's go back to my wine example. I live in Oklahoma and you live in New York. And so you say, you have this really nice bottle of wine, could I borrow it? I say, sure, John, you've got to give it back to me. But because I live in Oklahoma, I have to ship it to you. So it costs me $5.
Next day, yes.
Well, it'll be $15, more than that then. So I ship it to you. Now it's reasonable for me to say, now, John, I've lost my wine, plus I've lost my, whatever is $15 of shipping. Could you reimburse me the $15 of shipping, plus give back the bottle of wine? at the end of the day, I'm no worse off nor better off than before I loaned it to you. I'm back in the same position. And the church had always, in her explanation of the usury teaching, said that's perfectly fine. So if I suffer a loss by lending you the money, you can pay my costs and my loss.
I should make that good.
Even to the point of, let's say I'm a merchant, I'm in Venice in the 15th century, and I'm a merchant, and you really need some money. I said, I'll lend you some money. But I actually needed that money to buy some goods that I have to sell at the fair tomorrow. And by doing it, I'm going to lose out on my income, for the day. And you say, oh, don't worry, because you lent it to me, and then I'll make up for you what you would have had anyway. Again, even the church said that that's still a compensation for loss. Now, what I can't do is, well, John, I think if I had kept that money, I would have made $1 billion with it tomorrow, so you give me $1 billion. No, I have to, the amount that I'm saying I lost as a profit has to be a reasonable calculation of what I really would have made. And so again, all of that has been consistent through the centuries. Now, what gets difficult is applying those principles to our system now. And I mentioned money. This is the biggest issue. For a long time, money satisfied its purpose. And Aristotle tells us what is one of the main purposes of money? It's a measure. It's a rule and measure, so that we're able to exchange things. So I have a shoe. I'm a shoemaker. You build a house. It would be unjust for me to sell you a shoe for a house. Right? Everybody can understand that's not fair. But we have to now have a way to trade that we can commensurate those things. We can measure them and say, well, how many shoes are equal to a house?
Yeah, and you don't need 300 pairs of shoes.
And I don't need 300 pairs of shoes. So we invent money as a measure to bridge that gap.
I think Aquinas said a measure. I just lost the definition. Anyway, go ahead.
Of money?
Yeah.
As a rule and as a measure
and
of
a measure of things
to exchange, to be exchanged. Yes. And so one of the goals, if that's its purpose, money, and money is a creation of man. It's not part of the natural world. It's our creation to help us do things better. But if it's going to fulfill its purpose to be a rule, it's got to be stable. And think about it, that's obvious. A ruler's job is to measure. If I want to measure this stage, a ruler, to be a good ruler, can't be changing its size every time I pick it up. Right? So if it's a meter's this big and then I move over here and now it's this big, I'll say, oh, John, this is 5 meters. But the meter I used every time I changed shape. It would be a worthless rule. And so everyone understood, well, money needs to be stable, because otherwise, at the point you buy my shoes, we use one measure. The point I buy your house, it's different. There's room for a lot of error there. And for a long time, money was relatively stable. And again, it's something that can be affected. But what we have since banking and fractional reserve banking in particular, and the type of money we have now, it is completely unstable. It changes value all the time. So we're constantly, every time we take out a dollar bill, it's shrinking and growing all the time. And we all know this by the word inflation, and we all know what this means, right? That money, everyone knows that. If you find some money that your grandmother hid in the mattress 50 years ago, what was a lot of money for her is not today. And so this is one of the biggest problems with applying the church's principle on usury, is that if I lend you some money today, if it's $1,000 or 1,000 lira, to go back to the old money of this country, if you pay it back to me in 5 years, if you say, well, you loan me 1,000, here's 1,000, we all generally know that that's probably now not equal anymore, because it's probably not worth the same.
Devalue, yeah.
And so in justice, you should pay me some different nominal amount to equal it. But how do we calculate that? Get 20 economists up here who get 20 different figures on what inflation is. The money system has been so corrupted that we're all kind of groping in the dark in this area. And this is what's led a great Jesuit thinker, Bernard Dempsey, in the early 20th century. He was a brilliant man. He was a trained theologian and an economist. I think from Harvard. He had if I remember right, his PhD in economics from Harvard. And this led him to comment in the 30s that he observed a very pernicious thing had happened in the area of usury. He said, usury has gone from an individual sin to an institutional sin. It's been institutionalized, in that money has been so obscured that it hides and obscures when usury is occurring, so that we can't actually find it and pinpoint it to cover it up and make it therefore more prevalent.
But
it was, I think, a prophetic and really brilliant observation.
But I would say, too, that the masters of money, the manipulators, do know what they're doing.
Oh,
it's
yes,
not a mystery.
Yes. No, yes. But to people, the ordinary people,
right.
and to even people, the government formulating laws, it's very difficult to formulate when you're shooting at a moving target. And I think you're right. Those behind it have intentionally moved it, but that's the problem. And that is the one area where the church had been prudent in the early 19th century, and this was misconstrued. I hear this argument a lot from people that misuse it. In the 19th century, this system was evolving. And so in the past, usury was dealt with very publicly. There were ecclesiastical courts that would rule on it. And the church started to back away from that and move it to the internal form, to the confessional. Why? Because again, it was more complicated. It wasn't simple factual patterns. Calculating my loss was much more complicated. And so the church will deal with this in the confessional, where there can be more time to deal with this privately.
It also means the priest had to be very well trained in this area.
It did. Then next problem, priests are having trouble with it, saying, I've listened to all this, I can't tell whether this is usury or not. And so they wrote to the Holy See. The Holy See issued a series of letters in the 19th century from the Holy Office. And what they basically said is, okay, from the facts you've described, and these were loans where people were charging very, very small additions. He said, it sounds like they're probably safe. It's not immoral, but it's a mess out there. And as long as your penitent is keeping it to this very low level that's probably on the far side of the line, and as long as they have a good intention, they say, I'm not trying to do something wrong, I just can't figure this out. And as long as they say, if the Holy See were to come out with a specific ruling and say what you did was wrong, they would immediately stop. Mm-hmm. You leave the penitents alone, meaning don't withhold absolution. And that's one of the key documents that proponents of the usurious system we have try to say, oh, the church changed their teaching. When we look at that history, not at all. All the church said was, this is very complicated, and we want to be just and fair in our rulings, and so we're urging prudence. We're urging the confessors to be careful. And they're very clear. If somebody comes in and says, oh, I'm running the equivalent of a payday lender, that I'll lend you $300, you'll pay me back $10,000 next year, mm-hmm. That's usurious, get out of here. You're not absolved. But it was dealing with the cases that were just more difficult and said err on the side of person of its goodwill.
I was just going to say, it was yes. On the side of the penitent.
Yes.
I mean, very much so.
Yes. But and so that is what happened with the church's teaching. And before we go on, there's one other false, I'll debate myself here, one other false argument that people raise against the church's teaching. They say, but if usury is regulated in law, even that's natural law, not even just human law, business will suffer. There won't be any investment in business, and we'll be all poor because businesses, well, that's false. Two grounds. First of all, the church's teaching made very clear distinctions. There's a difference between loaning mere money for the use to buy something. So I lend you money to pay medical bills or to buy a house, and investing capital in a business. And there, where I invest capital in a business, has nothing to do with the principles on usury. That is a different type of transaction, and I'm entitled to share in the profits that we jointly make. And that's governed by a different teaching, the just price teaching, that we negotiate a just agreement on that. Not at all. So it doesn't discourage, and in fact, it encourages investment in business. Pope Innocent IV, when he condemned usury, in one of the many times the Holy See did, made this point very clear. He said, allowing unbridled usury actually hurts business. Because what does it do? It draws investment and capital away from business. So, and you're going to start up a business, John. You say, I need an investment. I think you'll probably make about 10% return. You say, okay. If I could, instead of that, lend money to poor people to buy food and clothing and make 30, 40, 50, 100%, well, John, that's a great deal, but I'm going to make a lot more over here, human nature. Mm-hmm. And so what Pope Innocent pointed out very cleverly is the more you allow and encourage usury, you actually drain investment away from business and put it in unproductive activities. And what do we see in our country? It's draining of investment away. Do you know that there are 30,000 payday lenders? And these are the most extreme examples of usurers in the United States, which is more than McDonald's, Target, Burger King, and there's at least 2 or 3 other chain stores I can't remember in the list combined.
Good grief. Yeah.
Where's all our money getting invested in? Lending money to people to buy necessities. Why? Because they make a lot more, the money holders make a lot more money out of, rather than putting it into factories and manufacturing and agriculture in real production. So this whole idea that actually this teaching of the natural law and of the church will harm business is the exact opposite. Having laws that encourage investment in business rather than this is better.
This brings to mind, I might be leaping into the future here, but what this brings to my mind is the whole, and I'm not telling people to go cut up their credit cards, but the whole credit card system we have. Mm-hmm. How would you categorize? I mean, the fact that you're running an 18% or 20%, what's it called, a fee or
APR percentage?
Yeah,
rate,
percentage.
That's cheap, 18% for most credit cards.
Yes, but where would you categorize that within the basic
Now, again, credit cards are really interesting because, like we're talking with Dempsey, there's an aspect of them that's done to hide what's going on. So you have to separate with credit cards. There are two functions they serve, one of which is legitimate and one isn't. In one sense, credit cards serve a very useful purpose of facilitating payment. Right? And so I think when money was gold coins, it was very inconvenient. You had to carry around big sacks of money. That's a problem. So men tried to invent ways of making that easier. So we had paper. So I deposit my money in a bank and say, I'd be able to represent that by a piece of paper and say, well, you can go to the bank and get my money out if you want, and I'll pay you with that. And so there is a legitimate human ingenuity to find more efficient ways of, again, money is an invention of humankind. It can be anything. Through history, it's been cattle, grain, gold, silver. So we're free to use what we want. And credit cards, in light of technology, in one aspect of them, are a very useful means. Rather than carrying a lot of money around, you can carry one item that if it gets stolen, you don't lose your money. It provides security. And that's actually a good innovation of human technology. But then disguised within that is a way of getting people to borrow money usuriously. Because they send them to you, they get you involved in, and then it's very easy because you don't feel the money coming out of your pocket, so you put it down, and you're hit with 30-40% charges. And then it's been shown that if you pay the minimum payment, just straight along, you will have overpaid your debt by hundreds and hundreds of times. I mean, there's an example I cite in the book, someone who on credit like that bought a television that you could buy for about $200. And with all the finance charges and everything, she ended up paying close to $1,000, which is equivalent to buying multiple television sets.
Yes.
But again, because it's been abstracted and people don't think about it at the point of sale, that's the danger, the insidious danger of it. Well, and it gets worse because our government, to help us out, passed the 2005 Bankruptcy Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Now, I always tell my law students, this is the greatest example of don't judge a law by its title, because that title has nothing to do with what the law is about. Key provision of that, and if you know a little bit about bankruptcy, the idea is if your debts are so overwhelming you can't survive, you go to the bankruptcy court and your debts, some of them are forgiven, so you can get a fresh start and start over. So what that law did, among it, was make it very, very difficult, not exactly impossible, very difficult to discharge credit card debt. So you can go in and all your other debts get forgiven, except your credit cards. So it really was the Bankruptcy Reform and Credit Card Protection Act, but they call it consumer protection.
Yes.
And so not only are they reaping these massive profits, I mean, if you look at the bank, their biggest profit centers will be the credit card markets. But they now have the government making sure that you're going to pay to the last penny above any other creditors. Other people will, their debt will be wiped out, but not the credit card.
We're running out of time here. It's going by very quickly, but one thing I do want to follow up on is there was supposed to have been a law, they were talking about passing a law to forbid credit card companies from setting up on campus universities. Has everything been done by that? Because it's getting students head over heels in debt.
Yes.
They have the ability with this card, they're told the world is theirs.
Yes, they can.
And it sucks them in for life.
Yeah, I think there was an effort to do that, but as far as I know, I don't think it's actually gone into force. Interestingly, the one group the government has passed some laws to protect in that regard are the military. There's a whole bunch of laws the federal government passed. You can't have payday lenders on bases. Mm-hmm. You can't, there's restrictions on sending credit cards in. So the government basically said, to the people we need to go fight these wars for us, we're going to protect them a little bit, but the rest of you, you're on your own. That's the only group that the government has, as far as I know, really protected that way.
Okay, well, we've talked about quite a few things in this program. We have about 50 seconds. Would you like to sum up anything as far as...
Well, I think to sum up, we all see the financial crisis around us in all Europe, the United States. And I think St. Thomas Aquinas predicted this indirectly 800 years ago. In commenting on Aristotle's ethics, he made a very interesting comment. He said, man needs exchange. We need economics. We need it to live. But a society which continually and pervasively allows unjust, immoral types of exchange to dominate, eventually all exchange will freeze up and it will collapse. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now. Now again, there's lots of technical issues and this and that, and the rating agencies should be regulated more, lots of details. But at the root of it, we've enshrined immoral principles, and not that the civil law doesn't outlaw them, but we've dismissed the natural law and said we can do whatever I want with impunity. It's not even wrong. And what do we have? A system collapsing around us.
Yes, it's we reap what we sow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. McCall, and we hope to do this again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
In the final vision on October 13, 1917, Our Lady silently held out the scapular, a gesture which indicates that she wants everyone to wear it.